Paranormasight, the Seven Mysteries of Honjo, is a pretty terrible name for a game, and not just because it commits the title:*long subtitle sin. It's also a horror adventure game, so before I begin, a heads up. First, this video has no jump scares in it. That isn't me setting you up for a scare. I have no interest in shocking anyone who hasn't consented to being shocked. Second, Paranormasight is a game whose primary focus is its story. Apparently I'm covering a lot of such games at the moment. This video contains footage from a variety of scenes in the game, but mostly without giving clear context for said scenes and always without showing their conclusion. It also shows multiple characters in the game, but all of them are already revealed by the game's title art. If that still sounds like more than you'd want to see, then you should probably stop watching now. If you want to tell a horror story through a computer game, you've got a few options open to you. The most obvious might be a third-person survival horror game, something like Alone in the Dark or the early Resident Evil. Awkward controls to up the tension, relentless enemies to keep you on your toes. Or maybe you'd rather go for something a bit more immersive, something intimate and first-person. Really let the player experience the terror of navigating the nightmarish corridors of, say, Citadel Station, or a house filled with sentient mould, or the bottom of a blood ocean. But all of these options sound, well, pretty horrific. What if you want horror without the horror? You want the themes, but not to actually scare your players out of their wits. Well, you could make an action horror game. Players tend to be a lot less stressed out when they can just start blasting to make the demons go away. Something like Left 4 Dead, Resident Evil 4, or if you're less competent, Resident Evil 6.
How many of our men are dead because of that bitch? I'm right there with you, Captain, but your personal vendetta isn't going to get us anywhere.
To give players all the trappings of a horror setting, but none of the actual stress. Or you maybe could look back to the very first graphic adventure for inspiration, 1980's Mystery House, designed by none other than Roberta Williams. Williams is perhaps best known as the creator of the King's Quest and Gabriel Knight series, amongst many other games, but her first stab at the adventure game genre was a straight-up murder house setup, with the player needing to figure out who the murderer is in the creepy mansion they're locked inside as various other characters meet their demises. Looking back to the graphic adventure for inspiration puts you in good company. The idea of story-led horror games where death is a risk but the dread is slower, where fear is wielded as a mood rather than a weapon, is an enduring one. Take 1992's Otogriso, the first sound novel, which would in turn inspire the first visual novels. This was a haunted house mystery, or rather, mysteries, as the choices you made, plus a pinch of random chance, changed the nature and conclusion of your universally ill-fated jaunt into a mansion after your car breaks down in a storm, and not even a single time warp to break the tension. Or how about 1995's Clock Tower, which is, stop me if you heard this before, a haunted house mystery. Only this time it's haunted by a maniacal child with giant scissors. No Dario Argentos were harmed in the making of this game. It's into this genre that Paranormasight steps. The horror adventure game, I mean, this one isn't in fact a haunted house mystery. No, instead you get to enjoy a haunted neighbourhood mystery as you busy yourself getting menaced around Honjo in Sumida, Tokyo. And by you, I actually mean a whole bunch of protagonists. Paranormasight, you see, is effectively an anthology horror story, albeit centred on a linked set of mysteries and their associated curses. You'll get to experience these mysteries from each of the main characters' perspectives, gradually unpicking the nature of the curses and coming to understand how each character fits into the greater whole of the story. From a grizzled detective to a bereaved mother, a justice-seeking schoolgirl to a self-declared boring office worker, the cast is pleasingly varied, and each character you inhabit is impressively distinct in personality and motivation. The use of multiple mysteries and multiple characters also allows the game to really lean into its key motifs of how far a person will go to achieve a specific goal, and of reaping what you sow. Through different perspectives and experiences, you get to see these same concepts play out, seeing how outcomes are shaped by the character's ambitions, morals, and choices. It's an engaging process, and one which really helps drive the game's creeping dread, even as it reduces the actual stress of playing. The more you see things play out, the more you can predict how things are going to go, and the more you can see the pitfalls ahead of each character. Where many adventure games struggle with this particular aspect, I'm far from the only person to have been frustrated by Ace Attorney Phoenix Wright failing to spot an obvious contradiction and having to dance around it for half an hour. In the context of a horror game, it only adds to the ironic tension, as we, the player, know something the character can't, and have no option but to watch the inevitable play out in front of us. As dark as the story gets, and as true to the horror genre as the game stays, it avoids gratuitous scenes. It's a game which engages with the themes of horror more as a means to explore its characters than as an exercise in terror. The game is very much a mystery to be solved, and also a horror story. You get the satisfaction of uncovering information which recontextualizes the story as a whole, shedding light on events and motives. Oh, that's why the character's behaving that way, you think to yourself. And then, oh no, that's why the character's behaving that way. Each new revelation illuminates more of the truth, a truth which casts ever deeper shadows on the narrative. None of which would be impactful if the characters didn't mean anything to us, so it's just as well they're a sympathetic bunch. They aren't necessarily all agreeable characters or even morally good characters, but they feel like people with understandable drives and distinct personalities. And it's not just the characters we inhabit this goes for. The game does a particularly good job of making us feel for and fear for the secondary cast. We know exactly where each protagonist is as we play them, but every time we have to leave a secondary character off camera, a quiet fear begins to chitter away in the background. We can predict what might happen to our own character, but a character whose location we're unsure of? Anything could happen to them. Key to us worrying about these sidekicks is what a likeable cast of characters they are. For the office worker protagonist, we have a fan of the occult with a uniquely sunny disposition that he happens to have a crush on. For the grizzled detective, a naive rookie cop who's just excited to be here. And for the schoolgirl, another schoolgirl, albeit one who happens to be an apprentice psychic who's doing her best to protect the protagonist using what powers she has. These are characters you root for, and every time the game puts them out of your sight, you'll be worrying about them until they return. And I mean out of sight. One of the smartest bits of design in the game is its perspective. And yes, this is a first-person adventure game, not an unusual design, but in this case it's truly first-person. While you're generally rooted in space, your view isn't fixed. You can look around at will, and indeed must do, in order to uncover the clues you need to progress. And the other characters are actors in the scene. They don't follow the genre standard of being a static object always on screen, or an object that effectively teleports you when it's time to talk. No, they inhabit a space in the environment, and can move around of their own accord. So if you're not looking at them, well, you can't be sure that they'll still be there when you look back around, or indeed what state you might find them in. This is also a mechanic which lends itself, as you may realise, to jump scares. Thankfully, for those people who don't enjoy a jump scare, I dislike jump scares tremendously, the game is very sparing with this particular trope, and they're always earned. You'll generally have some expectation that something bad is likely to happen before it does, rather than the cheap, completely out of the blue shock and awe that some films and games favour. It's also a game happy to engage fully with its setting. Though this was writer-director Takanori Ishiyama's first game to be made with release outside of Japan on the cards, there are no attempts in the game to paint this as anything other than Japanese horror. This goes for the setting, of course, 1980s suburban Tokyo with all the cultural and aesthetic trappings that entails, but also for the nature of the horror. Where American horror likes its Puritan moralizing, have teenage sex, get murdered by some sort of vengeful being, yada yada, and British horror likes to mix cults and class into a particularly gritty porridge, this is spirits, curses, and if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, all the way down. At the core of the game lie the eponymous Seven Mysteries of Honjo, a genuine set of legends. As Ishiyama told Superjump magazine in an interview, it is a rather obscure folklore that has not been dealt with in many other games, movies, dramas, etc., and the content of the folklore is vague in a positive sense, with many ambiguities and spaces, as well as no fixed stories or number of stories, so it was convenient for us to create our own interpretation. Since many people, even those who are Japanese, are not familiar with this folklore, it was necessary to explain it as concretely as possible, so ukiyo-e prints and such were used. The local government of Sumida Ward also helped us by providing materials and supervising the project. And it's a smart choice, basing the story on a real myth, using ukiyo-e, woodcut prints popular in Japan between the 17th and 19th centuries, that depict the Seven Mysteries, engaging with the local authority to accurately represent Sumida Ward, gives the whole story a feeling of authenticity. The various characters' responses to the mysteries, of belief, disbelief, or simple unawareness, all ring true and help ground them. Meanwhile, the folklore's relative obscurity allows for creative use of it, particularly when it comes to weaving its nature into the game's puzzles, establishing cues for the player to pick up on and rules to internalise in order to overcome some of its more fiendish moments. Altogether, the game is a masterclass in horror adventure game design. The mystery is strong, leaving you to pull together the pieces even as you solve more direct puzzles. It lets you hope for each character, even as you fear the worst, and it wraps everything up in a handsome, evocative package. It has just the right level of friction, just the right level of tension, and it's delightful to see that it did well enough to justify a sequel. If you've not yet given Paranormasight a try, I can think of no better time to indulge in a spooky little mystery than late February? One further thing I will say about the game, clocking in at around 8 hours to complete helps keep the experience well paced and satisfying. It also means that, unlike with games which tend towards the epic in length, here you're likely to come out of the game ready for more. This is no Death Stranding where you're secretly thankful for the half-decade recovery time between entries. So if you've reached the end of Paranormasight and would like to follow it up with something similar, I have a few suggestions for you. First, I should mention its sequel. I can't recommend that, but it's not because I dislike the game, simply at the point of writing this video the game isn't out, and therefore I've not played it. Hopefully, it's great. If you're specifically after some more paranormal horror with a distinctly Japanese flavour, and without a desire to be terrified, then I can recommend two films by Nobuhiko Obayashi. The first is House from 1977, which is one of the most unique horror movies you'll ever see. It's just something else. As much fairy tale as horror, a film mixing absurd, naive elements in with dreamlike horror to incredible effect, and describing it would necessitate a video all of its own. The Discarnates from 1988, meanwhile, is less wild, but it uses elements of a ghost story to tell a unique and moving story about loss and the passage of time. It's a particularly fascinating to watch film if you've seen or plan to see 2023's All of Us Strangers, which is in fact a remake of The Discarnates, albeit one with a meaningfully distinct perspective to offer. If on the other hand you're more interested in playing other great horror games, again minus the terror, I can heartily recommend the delightfully unsettling Mouthwashing from last year, though be warned that it is a much more gratuitous game in terms of violent imagery. There's also the quirky World of Horror, whose unique combination of RPG gameplay and I can't believe it's not Junji Ito 1-bit art makes for a memorable, if slightly janky, experience. And perhaps an obvious choice, but Everybody's Gone to the Rapture is rightly regarded as a classic, and its radio play approach to horror remains unique as a video game storytelling mechanic. Alternatively, if what you're really interested in is something mechanically similar, but not necessarily thematically, a game with a branching narrative that you have to untangle as its central element, I can think of no better recommendations than 2012's Zero Escape Virtue's Last Reward, a sci-fi thriller juggling escape room puzzles with a wonderful brain teaser of a narrative to weave into coherence, and the fabulous 428 Shibuya Scramble. That game is from the studio that created Otogiriso. This 2008 classic received a translation into English in 2018 and remains an essential title for anyone interested in branching adventure games, as this one sees you doing your best to line up the storylines of a selection of seemingly disparate characters in order to reach a satisfying conclusion. It is a delight, and again would need a video all of its own to describe. I should probably stop there. If I keep listing every horror property that I love and every game that I love, you're going to die of boredom. That being said, I did mention Junji Ito earlier in this video, and you should absolutely read some of his stuff if you haven't already. You'll have a miserable time, but in the best possible way. Other than that, I should probably recite the incantation that makes sure that Google don't come around my house to haunt me. How's it go? I guess, if you liked this video, please like and subscribe. I think that's it. Anyway, until next time, all the best.